Greetings, Tiborowski. It's a hot one today, and I know I look it. But anyway, as you've been aware, unless you're living in a cave in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, the United States of Trumpistan is being sundered by a monumental division, literally how to respond to the hundreds, nay thousands of statues, memorials, tombs, and etc. devoted to the memory of the Confederacy and its heroes. Largely ignored by the baby boomers and millennials, these relics have now become viewed by many as anachronistic eyesores at best, or abominations, symbolizing the rotten heart of American racism and oppression. The core of their supporters are Southern white conservatives who truly believe said relics are symbols of their regional and subnational heritage. To blacks, of course, they are symbols of slavery and the true lost cause of the Confederacy. Stars and Bars patriots piously insist these monuments, like the Confederacy itself, are not really about slavery or treason to the United States. To force their removal is to falsify history. Their opponents, however, insist that they are falsifying, not memorializing history, as every Confederate leader thus rendered in stone and metal was a slave owner himself, and symbolized that slaveholding regime. The Sultan of Trumpistan, Donald the Magnificent, has tried to split the difference, claiming there's good golly gosh darn folks on either side. Well, the problem is that neo-Nazis, fascists, white supremacists, and their ilk have decided to endorse these monuments as the very symbols of white power the liberals and blacks and Antifa say they are, as if in conscious parody of these claims, and as if despite the respectable Confederates who allegedly only want to preserve the memory of great-great-grandpappy at Chickamauga. And in doing so, the neo-Nazis are generating the kind of backlash that is ultimately going to bury the legacy of the Confederacy and its monuments, and finally remove the last of these stone and metal symbols from America's public spaces. As a personal aside, I can recall a monument in Natchitoches, Louisiana that everyone would doubtless find offensive, and I have a reproduction of it here. Known as Uncle Jack. In 1927, that statue of an old black man courteously bowing and doffing his battered hat at passers-by was placed in downtown Natchitoches on Main Street. And come to be known as Uncle Jack, he was supposedly the representation of an unknown loyal slave who saved the white folk of Natchitoches in a slave rising of the 1850s. The statue's inscription read, and I'll quote, "Erected by the city of Natchitoches in grateful recognition of the arduous and faithful service of the good darkies of Louisiana, donor J.L. Bryan, 1927. At the dedication ceremony, a resolution was passed stating that, and again I quote, "the faithful and devoted service rendered by the old Southern slaves in working and making crops and taking care of the women and children while their masters were away for many years, fighting to keep them in slavery, has never been equaled." Now, there you have it engraved as to what these monuments are in fact representing. In 1968, this one was removed from its downtown Main Street pedestal and chucked into the Cane River. In 1974, it was tucked into a corner of the local LSU campus, where it gathers dust without any real contextual explanation of its who or what or why fors. Before arguing that such physical disposal and burial is an indisputably good thing, I say let's stop for a more detached and long-term view. In the first place, the Grand Mojo of Trumpistan actually had a good point. If the main onus on these statues is that they represent slave owners and the slave owners' regime, what about the monuments to George Washington and Thomas Jefferson or Andrew Jackson? They were proud Southern gentlemen slave owners too, and the republic for which they fought and established and presided over as its elected chief representatives was a slave-owning regime at the highest levels of federal American law in their lifetimes. Although the issue of slavery itself in the United States was resolved by the Civil War, it did not, of course, begin there. So, to focus ire on Confederate leaders and their public symbols begs the question, and it's basically just feel-good politics, not a true confrontation with history. Bashing neo-Nazis or compensating for police brutality against Black Lives Matter protesters through surrogate violence against antique monuments to white power does not address the core issue. And how far can you reasonably take such a purge? Taking the dead slave owners off the money, renaming the nation's capital, and every city or state named after the three remaining slave-owning presidents. Even the capital district's namesake, Christopher Columbus, was a slave trader of Native Americans. It just seems that to start tearing down monuments and renaming the landscape is to go down the path of totalitarian regimes the world over who really believed they could erase history and create a new human consciousness by obliterating all physical symbols of the past, as well as the physical persons if possible. Well, this kind of superficiality is, in modern America, is hopefully only a surrogate lynching to date and not yet state policy. In any case, justice is not the true goal here, but historicized vengeance. And a hollow, Pyrrhic one at best, because the real monument of the past is not in any destructible piece of masonry, but in institutions, in laws, and in class structures that have been built brick by brick into everyday life. That can only be changed by a thorough social revolution. Pulling down an old piece of rock, as is being currently done to the remaining Lenin statues in Ukraine, is no guarantee of freedom, democracy, human rights, social justice, or really anything of lasting value being put in its place. All that is really developing so far here is a round of protest, counter-protest, counter-counter-protest, counter-counter-counter-protest, where the right now resolves to remove monuments and symbols it doesn't like. With everyone vandalizing and demonizing each other's public representations, the entire moral purpose is being lost. And in this sense, the neo-Nazi knuckleheads will have won because you will be doing their job for them. So what's the alternative? Quite simple. Build your own statues, your own monuments, fasten your own plaques on walls. While some of this has been done, it's not been done nearly enough. These particular monuments of the Confederacy now under controversy were constructed mostly by private sponsors like the Sons and Daughters of the Confederacy and donated to public spaces across the South and border states around 1900 as symbols of rising Jim Crow white supremacy. All right then, merely follow suit. Take out public subscriptions, solicit private donations for statues that counter Uncle Jack to Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, John Brown, Crispus Attucks, Fannie Lou Hamer. Let everyone tend to their own symbols in the country's public places. To each his own, in other words. Unleashing a surrogate civil war over the memory of the past shows that the past is not truly past because the core issues have always been avoided, and turning a stone man on a stone horse into rubble is just a new form of avoidance. It never fails, does it? All right, let's see who this is. All right already. All right. Who is it? Who? Uncle Jack? I didn't know a statue could talk. Well, if a jackass can speak over the air from the White House, why not a stone jack over the phone from Louisiana? Anyway, we just wanted to tell these two baristas how lucky they have it to fight their battles in stone and metal, not flesh and blood. But that's what the monuments do honor, isn't it? Blood that's petrified in the sediment of history. What's that? This only proves you can't still get blood out of a stone? Well, Uncle Jack, you might be onto something, but no one's prepared to listen to your long, humiliating experience. Until everyone can face you in public, there will be neither justice nor peace in the United States of Trumpistan.